Alrighty. Good morning. George, I see you're in there. How about a sound check, my friend? No music? That's a private joke between George and myself. Alrighty. George is here. Let's see who else is in. Eileen and Mary. Welcome from the northern part of Sweden. Probably as cold as it is here. Alrighty. Doug's in here. Thank you, sir. That's great. Everything's good, George says. Okay, well, fantastic. Take off the earbud and we will proceed on. Welcome. Also want to say thank you to our Blog Talk Radio audience. They will be hearing this on Friday, and today is Wednesday, January 16th. The topics today are particle colliders. In the news, we have both China and CERN regarding their super collider projects. 100-kilometer rings that they both are proposing. So we'll put that into perspective from our 30,000-foot perspective. I have my dual slit experiment shirt on today again. Of course, have to have my geek shirt. So we have our wave particle duality, the collapsing of the waveform into particles. So last week we talked about that. We talked about particles in motion, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle as it relates to particles in motion and momentum and location. We talked about wave-particle duality and wave interference and collapsing of the waveform into particles. All of those good things. So if you have not listened to the live streams in the past, we have started about almost 4 weeks ago on Thursdays, providing a classroom environment in which we take a specific topic and break it down into the essentials. We're starting with quantum mechanics, quantum physics, because that is, in my opinion, the foundation for all of modern science. All of the disciplines of science build upon quantum mechanics and particle physics today. And it wasn't that way 100 years ago, but it certainly is now. So that's a quick backdrop as to what we've done, including covering on Wednesdays, as we're doing today, topical events, topical news stories. And there's an awful lot that can be covered, but we try to be very focused and succinct about focusing on one or two topics on Wednesday that's in the broader media coverage rather than the classroom where we're being very specific about kind of what I call the nuts and bolts of science. So Wednesday's the broader perspective, again, from my 30,000-foot elevation, I like to call it, looking at the big picture, putting these things in context. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? Why are these things important in our everyday walk of life and dealing with how these things are impacting us? So particle colliders, particle accelerators, the topic of today, may seem to be far removed from our everyday life, but I will demonstrate to you how the colliding of particles, how the acceleration of particles, both in a circular fashion and in a linear fashion, directly relate to scientific research, which then has the spin-off effect into the products and services that we enjoy or perhaps don't enjoy in terms of the weapons perspective. And I'm going to just give you the big headline, the big, what's in it. Particle colliders around the world, yes, they are used for chemistry, for medicine, for electronics, research, these kinds of things. But always bear in mind from 30,000-foot perspective that this is a system of research and development that is primarily funded by the military complex. We always talk about military, industrial, and intelligence complex as a whole. But the primary funding, the primary driving force behind particle accelerators and colliders has always been and will continue to be for weapons development. So that's really what I want to underscore, and then I'll backfill everything here today. But always bear in mind the things that I'm sharing with you today as an overview of how colliders operate and what their plans are for the future development of colliders. All of this needs to be underscored by the understanding that behind all of this science is always the development of weapons systems, directed energy weapons, accelerated particle and directed kinetic energy weapons. Those are particles that are accelerated as weapons. Directed energies such as synchrotron energies, and we'll define that. A combination of particles and energies. And also, really, I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but terraforming the planet. And we'll get into that as well. So let me check the chat room, because I try to be conversant with you guys in chat and make sure that I cover your questions if we have any. And we've got a good turnout here. Hello, Andy. Jeannie's in there. Lori, Shoshana, got your emails. Thank you, Rogers. Shoshana Rogers, excellent emails you've been sending to me. George and I have had some great conversation in the last couple of days. I won't share that with you, but always appreciate comment and guidance. You know, wisdom that comes from many of you that are biblically proficient, that are scholars, if you will, in Scripture, because we do try to put this in the context of biblical Scripture. And we can't separate the physical from the spiritual, as I always bring up. And so the wisdom from a spiritual perspective from you as the audience, as my friends and patrons, is always appreciated. You know, I can misspeak, I can say things inappropriately and perhaps things that are not in concert with what you've read and interpreted in biblical Scripture. And so it's always nice to have a conversation back and forth between those of you that are supporting you know, the research and reporting that I do here through Patreon. And again, for the benefit of our Blog Talk audience, because these Wednesday broadcasts are repeated on Blog Talk Radio on Friday, I encourage you, I invite you to become a patron, because then you not only have access to these live streams live on Wednesdays outside of the broadcast on Friday, but the classroom environment we have on Thursday. And on Sundays, we have kind of what I call a fireside chat, just an opportunity to talk about a whole host of subjects that you have an interest in. And they've run about 2.5 to 3 hours sometimes on Sundays. So a much more relaxed environment. I'm not trying to, you know, push a lot of information into a short period of time like I'm doing today. So I was not able to, and I thank you for your emails you sent to me, was not able to broadcast this last Sunday just due to, you know, lack of energy, just worn out and tired. And, you know, that's the short summation of it. And I appreciate everybody's prayers and thoughts that you sent to me. But no harm done, no damage, just kind of worn out. But I will do my best to continue with our Wednesdays, Thursdays, and certainly Sunday live stream broadcasts. So with that in mind, looks like everybody's here. The music is turned off. I emphasize that because I take the earbuds out and sometimes I forget that the music is still playing. Where we are going, let's jump right over to this image here, and I'll let you see that while I'm describing this to you. Again, this is a two-way conversation, and I have had many emails over the last few days regarding the announcement that just came out from CERN regarding their plans for increasing their collider project to a 100-kilometer main ring. And what we're looking at here is if you will, a Google Earth image overlaid with the border of Switzerland, France, and the smaller ring, of course, is the Large Hadron Collider, the main ring that they call it, and then the proposed larger ring, the FCC. This is the Future Circular Collider Project. Now, the small ring is 17 miles long, or 27 kilometers. What they're proposing here is 62 miles, or 100-kilometer ring. This will be the same size as what China has just announced. So I'm bringing the two into the conversation, both China and CERN's announcement. Let me see what I've got here for graphics here for you. Just give me a moment. I want to show you China's. Okay, so China doesn't have a ring image, so to speak, but what I want to share with you is just their facility that looks above ground, very much like CERN. So this is a artist's rendition of the above ground facility that China is planning to build, and this, they are coining the phrase Higgs factory. Higgs factory taken from the Higgs boson. Now, China announced in 2012 their plans to build a Higgs factory. That was the same year that CERN announced that they had discovered the energy signature for the Higgs boson in 2012. Now, I have some exception to that, but I won't editorialize about it, and I'm just going to stick to the overview today. But below ground, interestingly, 100 meters or 300 feet below ground, China plans and has been planning since 2012 to build a 100-kilometer ring-based synchrotron particle accelerator. CERN is also announcing a 100-kilometer or 62-mile ring. Now, CERN, their LHC facility is 100 feet or 100 meters below ground, 300 feet. China likewise will place their ring 100 meters or 300 feet below grade. So very interesting. It's kind of like, if it isn't broken, don't try to fix it. They're just really virtually building upon the shoulders of the work at CERN and placing their facility likewise 300 feet below grade. Now, part of the reason for the depth is just for shielding purposes, because as you can see in this image, their headquarters is being built within a city facility, a city location. CERN's is very close by to the surrounding area as well. So they try to protect through shielding with 300 feet of earth any of the inhabitants on the surface. So not a big deal there. So let me put this in perspective for you as to what's going on, and then we'll drill down, literally. We will dig down into this and explain really what's going on. The announcement has come out this week from CERN regarding their larger 100-kilometer ring. Really has more to do with public relations than anything else. And the reason I say that is that this has been in development by committee. This Future Circular Collider, FCC, has been in committee for at least 10 years. Understand, these projects take an awful long time to plan. In that planning phase is not only the engineering that's going on, but also securing funding from multiple countries, including China. So when we talk about CERN right now, essentially the same process has been going on since 2012 in China. Fundraising, getting international governments and scientific bodies to participate. Now, it sounds kind of funny when you start talking about a comparison between the open society in Switzerland and Geneva and the closed society in China. China trying to bring in people from international scientific bodies and other countries to participate financially. So that's their biggest hurdle in China, really, is the fact that they are such a closed state. And really, this is a government-driven program more than a scientific. In the view of the world, they view this as more of a communist, government-driven scientific endeavor versus a more democratic scientific endeavor on the part of the Europeans. However, you and I know, again, from 30,000 feet, there really are no borders. There really are no sovereign nations. And this really folds into what happens in the scientific community anyway. The tradition in science has been, as much as possible, to share information across borders, despite political ambivalence or conflict. On the political level, on the governmental level, scientists have always tried to share information despite politics. So some of that is at work, but again, from 30,000 feet, we know that the governments are the ones who fund the scientific projects. When we say the governments, of course, we mean the military, industrial, and intelligence complexes that really dictate to the governments what will be done, what the agenda is, and what monies will be spent. So as we drill down, we keep in mind that, again, this military push, their agenda, their weapons programs, their funding, pushes the governments and then pushes the scientific community. And that's kind of the pecking order, if you will. All right, so just want to check the chat room periodically here. Okay. Yeah, if you're having any buffering issues, it's probably at your end. I'm just checking the chat room. Oftentimes, questions pop up about buffering of the live stream at the receiving end. Just to let you know, again, those of you that are new to the live streams, I do have a 5G system. It is Ethernet cable connected to a cable feed. So I have a pretty bulletproof and robust system here now, going through all of the teething problems that it's taken to get to that point. But if you're experiencing buffering at your end, it's probably your bandwidth that's being affected. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. Good. Shoshana says, I hope I'm pronouncing your name appropriately, Shoshana, but thank you for the thumbs up. All right. Good. All right. Yeah, make sure you're just running one device at a time on your internet service. So let me proceed on. Again, trying to give you just the impact is, why are they bringing this out? So let's look at the public relations side of what CERN is doing. CERN, as you know, presently the Large Hadron Collider, since the 3rd of December, has been shut down. They are changing out the superconducting magnets, injectors, microwave cavities, some of the safety systems, modifying some of the beam lines. There are a number of things going on, and I can elaborate on that if you want me to today or even in the classroom tomorrow. I have plenty of background, plenty of understanding of the infrastructure and the machinery of the Large Hadron Collider. A lot of that is covered, again, for the Blog Talk audience. I have a magazine called Entangled Magazine. It is a science magazine that is mixed with biblical scripture to keep the science in perspective according to the Bible. That's published on the 1st of every month. It has been published since June of 2017. When you subscribe, you have full access to all past issues since June of 2017 and continuing forward. If you are a patron, you already will be subscribed. So if you join Patreon, if you hire me as your reporter and researcher, you will also be subscribed to Entangled Magazine. Now, in that magazine, I have detailed the components within the Large Hadron Collider facility. It's more than one accelerator. They have linear accelerators. They have pre-accelerators that are ring-based and storage ring-based accelerators that then connect to the main ring, which is the large accelerator where the collisions actually occur. No other collisions occur at CERN other than in the main ring. And they have 4 main detectors connected to that. So what they propose to do is to build a larger main ring. They will use the Large Hadron Collider, the main ring, as a feeder into this new 100-kilometer main ring. The point that I want to share with you from the public relations side is that because the main ring, the Large Hadron Collider's main ring is shut down for 2 years to change out the magnets and other components, they need to justify keeping people on staff. They need to justify their funding, their stream of funding. They need to justify their existence. And there's more to it than that. But again, I'm trying to pack in a lot of information in this short broadcast today. We'll probably run about 2 hours. So just make sure you have your lunch and your coffee and your water and whatever, because we will run a full 2 hours today, provided my voice holds up. Here's what they're doing. They're trying to justify their existence. They're trying to build this picture that they will be along for a long period of time. And therefore, we are looking at, they're saying, not only are we going to upgrade the Large Hadron Collider's main ring in their present activities and produce what they will now call the high luminosity LHC. So the HL, high luminosity LHC, is the acronym for what they will be operating as in 2 years. They'll start low power collisions in 2 years, and then in 2026, the main ring will be fully upgraded and full power collisions of protons and electrons and protons and heavy ions of lead, and if they need to, heavy ions of gold particles, all in 2026. 2026 is when the big action takes place at the Large Hadron Collider. So how does this factor into this new FCC that they want to build? What's the timeline for that? Well, as I indicated, it takes about 10 years of planning, much like the Chinese have been planning since 2012 and are still planning. They haven't broken ground yet. The FCC has been in planning for 10 years. In fact, in the literature that I read, the scientific literature, even prior to the formation of a study committee 10 years ago, this discussion of a 100-kilometer ring has been going on for almost 20 years now. So these take quite a bit of planning. The construction itself is monumental, as you can imagine, trying to dig a circular tunnel 300 feet below grade that's 100 kilometers in length, or 62 miles in length, takes an awful long time. So none of this is going to happen today or tomorrow. We're looking at about a 30-year project. So why is it even relevant to talk about something that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 years before it comes online? Well, because again, it is maintaining this feed stream, this feeder stream of funding to the scientific community. They will talk about building this main ring, and I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but understand they need to continue the funding that not only employs today's scientists and engineers, but they need to be able to promote the educational process for young people to enter the universities and to then recruit out of the universities scientists and engineers for these projects. So they need to talk about the distant future, the 30-year timeline, to inspire young people to get into the pipeline, if you will, of the people that are necessary for not only the construction but also the operation of the FCC. So long-term planning rolls over into recruiting young people into this project. So that's why they're talking about it today, is for funding and for recruitment purposes. It also justifies what they're doing in the present day with the smaller ring, the 17 kilometer, 27 mile long main ring that they're upgrading. They have to justify the funding for the near-term project, the near-term upgrades of the LHC. In other words, they have to justify their existence. So what are they justifying? They are justifying weapons programs. So let's go back in history and take you back just a little bit of an overview as to what it was that prompted the formation of CERN as an organization and the building of the Large Hadron Collider. CERN broke ground in 1953. This was a weapons development program. The whole impetus was to bring into focus scientific communities for the purpose of continuing the Cold War development of nuclear warheads. And principally what they wanted to do is move away from testing with the actual detonation of a nuclear warhead below ground or in the atmosphere, rather than running the risk and also the polluting of the planet by the detonation of weapons, was the ability to model those detonations in a computer. And what I mean by this, and I've referred to this many times, modeling detonations in a computer, is to take small particles and collide them and see what the energy yield is, and be able to take that information from those collisions and use those to build out in a computer simulation, build out a larger detonation. It's an extrapolation of the data. If we have something on this scale and we scale it up to a larger scale, what does that look like? So extrapolating the data that is derived from collisions within particle colliders. So that is a very simple explanation of why colliders are important, is because they are for nuclear warhead research and development. Now that carried on into this concept of, in the public relations world, of discovering the origins of the universe. They wanted to have something that they could say to the public, who are the taxpayers who are funding all of this, something that looks different than a weapons development program. Understand, in the world of public relations, in the scientific community, as well as in the political arena, you have to be able to tell the public something that sounds benevolent to humanity, not something that is malevolent, something that is destructive, such as a nuclear weapons development program. So you start talking about things like the Big Bang, the singularity in terms of the origins of the universe, the primordial matter, the prima materia, as it's called. And so we got to this point in 2012 of them claiming that they had discovered the energy signature for the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson, in the world of theoretical physics, the theory being that the Higgs itself, by way of the Higgs field, gives rise to all other matter in the known universe. Now, last week I kind of beat up on the scientific community pretty hard because I was saying that they claim that they have been able to detect, they've been able to measure 15% of the universe with our instruments, 15% of the universe. And where I was taking exception was, well, if you don't have the instruments to detect the remaining 85% of the universe, how can you even say that it's 85% that you're not able to detect when you don't have the instruments to detect the 85% that you cannot detect? You see how this is a circular argument? It's just ridiculous. But let's stick to 15%. There are other scientists that say that they've measured only 5% of the universe. Some will say they've measured 15% of the universe. It actually is really irrelevant to you and I, because even at 5% of the universe that we're detecting, we are so small and so insignificant in terms of the scale of what we are able to measure, to detect, that it really doesn't matter. It's the mechanics of the universe that we should be focusing on, and that is where science is focusing with colliders, is on the mechanical operation of the universe. So to justify their funding into the billions of dollars with CERN itself, and understand there are more facilities other than just CERN. There are upwards to 100 different types of particle accelerators, synchrotron, ring-based, and linear accelerators around the world. Again, when I say there are over 100 particle accelerators in the world, some are very low power and they're used for medical research purposes, but most of them are of high order magnitudes, and they are used for weapons development programs. The public relations side of this from CERN is the Higgs boson, 2012, that they discovered something that gives rise to all other matter in the universe. And associated with the particle, the Higgs boson, a boson is a category of quantum particles, is the Higgs field. So when we talk about the wave-particle duality, when we talk about the energy waves, let me go back to my shirt here as an illustration. When you are looking at these waves, this is called a field, okay? So these are waveforms. They produce a field. The Higgs field is what I'm talking about here right now. So when we are examining the different mechanisms, and I'm going to put up another graphic here. This is an animation of what is going on with the main ring at CERN, okay? This is just a typical illustration of a particle accelerator. This one happens to be from Berkeley, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the idea here is, in public relations, you're saying that, hey, we think we have found the origins to the universe. If we understand the original material of the universe and how that original material produces all other matter, all other particles and energy waves in the universe, then we can have a better grasp as to how the mechanics of the universe operate. Now, why is that important? Let me give you an example that I have cited hundreds of times, and that is quantum computing. Quantum computers on a much smaller scale, they produce a qubit chipset, a quantum unit. Okay, a qubit is a quantum bit. It is a binary bit of quantum information. So a quantum chipset is a much smaller model of what I have illustrated on the screen here. It is a small particle accelerator. Now, in a computer, they're not colliding particles, but they are accelerating particles. At CERN in the main ring, the particles travel in opposite directions at near the speed of light. Those are typically going to be protons, electrons, and protons, or ions of lead and ions of gold. Now, in a quantum computer, there are electrons moving in opposite directions at near the speed of light, as are the particles within a synchrotron particle accelerator. In fact, electrons do travel at the speed of light. Matter, particles, is accelerated in an accelerator to 99.99%, just below the threshold of the speed of light. But in a quantum computer, the quantum mechanics is virtually identical to what happens in a particle accelerator. So why is it important to understand how the mechanical systems operate in the universe? Well, they have direct application to quantum computing. Because what you're doing is you are scaling down the universe which itself operates much like a quantum computer. The quantum mechanics of the universe on a universal scale are virtually identical to the quantum mechanics occurring in a quantum computer. So that's just one example of why an accelerator has direct application to something that we use in everyday life. Now, I say quantum computing in everyday life simply because there are quantum computers with D-Wave and IBM, Rigetti Computing, and others that are being used today. I've covered that extensively in the past. We're just going to focus on the accelerators today. Now, the question often arises as to the scale, as to the size. Why go bigger? You know, at CERN, they have a 100-kilometer ring. Well, why do you need to go, or excuse me, they have a 27-kilometer ring at CERN. Why go from 27 to 100 kilometers? Well, it again comes down to the mechanics, the quantum mechanics of what's involved here. What you're talking about is conservation of energy. When you accelerate particles in a straight line, they tend to maintain their mass and their energy. When you try to bend those particles from a straight line into a curved pathway, those particles begin to lose their kinetic energy. If you can increase the radius or the curvature, if you can lessen the bending of that linear acceleration, if the curvature is less, then you're able to maintain more kinetic energy, more energy in those particles. And so when you have a smaller ring that's 27 kilometers, like we have with the main ring at CERN, there's more energy loss. Loss of energy from those particles that are being accelerated. If you can enlarge the ring so that the radius, the curvature of those curves is of a larger scale, so you have a gentle curve instead of a sharp curve. If you have a gentle curve, as you do with a 100-kilometer ring, then you are able to conserve energy. You're able to increase the mass of those particles. And thereby, when you increase the mass of the particles, when you then collide those heavier mass particles, you now have a higher energy yield. Okay, now that sounds a little technical, but I'm going to repeat it and kind of break it down a little bit further. But let me check the chat room. Oh, okay, Lori, that graphic is hypnotizing you. All right, let's see if we can put another one up there. All right, so these are magnetic field lines we have up. Now, again, for those of you that are on Blog Talk Radio on Friday, you're not seeing the graphics. So it's another reason to become a patron so you can see the graphics that I'm providing to the live stream audience today. Let's do this. While I have this graphic up, and this is illustrating magnetic field lines. So electrons, which orbit around the nucleus of an atom, and then you have ions on the right, which are the remainder of that atom, the nucleus and the protons. That's an ion. An ion is an atom that has had its electrons removed. They call it stripping away of the electrons. You do that magnetically. If you take the negative electrons away, you have nothing left but the positive ions, which is the nucleus, which contains a zero charge nucleon, and then the positive protons. So think of the ions as just positive protons to make it simple. Okay, so that's defining what an ion is. But bearing that in mind, what I want, again, is to reiterate here is that in order to increase the power of a circular or synchrotron particle accelerator, a ring-based, as I like to call it, a ring-based accelerator, you need to be able to increase the pathway the diameter, the radius. You want to lessen the curvature of those so that you're able to have a curvature that allows for that increase in energy. The energy limit is limited. The energy within a particle is limited to the curvature, but also the strength of the magnets. There are magnets that are used for accelerating and holding to a curved pathway particles. Those are called dipole magnets. Dipole just means two. You have two poles. Dipole magnets take particles that are moving in a straight line and then bending them, forcing them to curve, to follow a curved pathway. So these are called bending magnets. Dipole magnets bend the particles. They push the particles into a curved pathway. Now, to confine them, to compress them down together, you use quadrupole magnets. Those are four-pole magnets, and both of those are used in the main ring of the Large Hadron Collider. So you have bending and you have confining magnets. To increase the energy yield or reach the energy limit, you have to have stronger and stronger magnets, which is what is going on right now with the upgrade at CERN with the LHC. They're taking out the niobium and titanium magnets that are superconducting and replacing them with niobium and tin. Niobium, some people pronounce it niobium or niobium and tin. So they're moving away from the lower power magnets to higher power magnets. These are superconducting, and to define that, it simply means that they cool them down to near absolute zero. This is called cryogenic cooling, and they use helium to do that. So if you picture the pipe, as they call the main ring, it literally is a pipe. It's a tunnel, and they have a metal pipe in it. Within that pipe, they pump in helium, and they use the helium to cool that environment so that the magnets, their resistance, those magnets that are now super cold, have less resistance to the flow of electrons. The electrons is the electrical current flowing through the niobium and titanium wire that is wound, forming a magnet. So those coils of wire have to be very cold so the electrons have very little resistance to their flow within the wires. Same thing with the material that they're upgrading to niobium and tin. They will be superconducting, but it has a ability to produce, because of the nature of tin versus titanium, they are able to pass more current through that niobium and tin material and thus raise the magnetic forces. The magnetic lines of force are increased. The scale that they use is what is known as a Tesla scale of magnetic lines of force. Tesla is rated as 1, which represents a magnetic field of the Earth. Now, if we have time today, we're going to talk about the magnetic field of the Earth, and we're going to talk about the poles and the migration of the northern and southern poles of the planet. If we have time, we'll talk about the pole flip. But what we're talking about here with niobium and tin is the ability to increase from 8 Tesla, 1 Tesla representing the magnetic pull of the Earth. The strength of the magnetic field of the Earth itself is rated as 1 Tesla. They've been operating at 8 Tesla. They want to go up to anywhere from 11 to 20 Tesla with the main ring. The larger ring, the FCC, the 100-kilometer model, they want to try to get up as high as 30 Tesla, perhaps even to 50 Tesla. So understanding that you need to have very strong magnets to bend particles moving at near the speed of light into a curved pathway. You have to have stronger and stronger magnets when you increase the number of particles. And when you have a gentle curve produced by a larger pathway, where you don't have to push those particles quite so with so much force, you don't have to bend them quite so much because they have a larger, smoother, more gentle curved pathway to traverse, you're able to realize a much higher density to the particles, what they call the central mass or the central rest mass of particles. If you can maintain the mass of the particle up to the point of collision, you can get a higher energy yield from that collision. Let's go to 30,000 feet. Why does this have any relevance to our everyday life? So now I have a graphic up that is showing particle collisions. Why is this even relevant? Well, it's what I led off with at the beginning of the discussion, is that these are weapons programs, high energy weapons programs. Kinetic energy means the colliding of an accelerated particle into a fixed object. That's a weapons system, kinetic energy, using particles to strike a fixed target, or even a moving target, but a solid target. The other is a directed energy weapon, where you are simply taking the energies produced by a particle accelerator and using those raw energies themselves as a weapons system. So if you develop a much larger accelerator with stronger magnets and a gentle curved pathway that conserves the energy of the particles being accelerated and gives you a higher rest mass, a higher mass particle that then collides, you can produce much higher energies. So what are these energies? Well, they're called synchrotron energies. Okay, so what's a synchrotron energy? The synchrotron energy is described as a gamma ray, which are high energy particles themselves, gamma rays, and X-rays, what are known as hard X-rays. You also can produce accelerators that collide matter and antimatter. Now these are electrons and anti-electrons, matter and antimatter. You can also do this with positrons. Virtually any element in the periodic table of elements has an antimatter reflection, an antimatter partner. So you can accelerate something like heavy ions of lead and collide them with antimatter of lead. But typically what's been going on in the discussions that relate to China and Japan, and we'll get to Japan in just a moment, are the collisions of electrons and positrons. Positrons are considered the antimatter of electrons. So colliding electrons. That is also a weapons program. Okay? So the higher the mass of a particle that collides, the higher the energy that is produced. And when I said synchrotron energies are gamma rays and hard X-rays. Hard X-rays are what are known as high luminosity energies. Now remember, when I talked about this upgrade to the high luminosity LHC, just changing the magnets and some other things, but not changing the diameter of the ring from 27 kilometers, which is going on between now and 2026. So in the near-term discussion leading up to 2026, we're talking about the high luminosity main ring as it exists today, just with more powerful magnets that give the ability, produce the ability to increase the mass of the particles and increase the number of particles. You've heard me describe the number of particles being arranged in the beamline as bunches of particles, and that's how the scientists describe those particles, bunches. And within those bunches, you have millions of particles. They have a string of bunches. Picture a string of sausages or a string of hot dogs strung together. The hot dogs are the bunches, and they are strung together, forming a line called a beam line. Now, the distance between those bunches, they also want to decrease. Presently, the distance between bunches in the beam line are measured in a nanometer. Okay? Actually, more specifically, as a nanosecond. They are described, the distance between bunches is described in time, a nanosecond, 25 nanoseconds. They want to lessen the distance, the scale between those bunches. They want to bring them closer together so that when they cross the streams, they cross the beam lines composed of bunches of particles. When they cross those streams, they can then have a higher number of particles that actually collide with one another. Again, keeping in mind that the beams move in opposite directions. Now, the graphic that I have up here is a simplified example of a synchrotron, this one having only one electron beam moving in a clockwise direction. Understand at CERN they have two beam lines moving in opposite directions at near the speed of light. Then within a detector they will cross those streams, or they will have them collide head on, depending on what they're looking for. The collision produces energy, gamma rays and X-rays, synchrotron energies, as well as the movement of the particles. Now, there's a lot more than just synchrotron energies that are produced by collisions, but what I want to emphasize here is that in the collisions, they are producing energies that can be used as weapons. Okay? The energy signature that is streaming off from these collisions within the detector, those energy streams are what they use to determine what particles they're seeing. So when I mentioned the Higgs boson, and that back in 2012 they said they found the energy signature of the Higgs boson, they didn't find the particle itself, because the particle winks out of existence in just a matter of just a few nanoseconds. The particle itself is not discovered. It's the signature of the particle, which is the energy released by that particle. So they're looking at energy signatures. This is what is meant by high luminosity. So when they talk about a high luminosity LHC coming online in 2026, they're talking about higher energy signatures. Again, this is a weapon system, higher energy weapons that are produced. All right, let me check the chat room. Okay, so hopefully I haven't lost you guys. Let's see what we're going on. Here's a comment in the chat room. They're trying to create strangelets and use the strong nuclear force as a source of power. All righty. Very good statement. Let me repeat that. They're trying to create strangelets and use the strong nuclear force as a source of power. Excellent statement. The December issue of Entangled magazine was devoted to strangelets. I gave quite a bit of background and a lot of the definitive nuts and bolts about strangelets. Strangelets predate the Higgs boson. So we said that they claimed to have found the Higgs boson in 2012, the energy signature of it. And that the Higgs boson, the particle itself, is derived from what is known as the Higgs field. They claim that the Higgs field makes up the majority of the universe, that the Higgs field is responsible for producing all other matter. So picture the periodic table of elements. Before there was a periodic table of elements, there was a Higgs boson that then produced that table of other elements. That's the scenario that they want to give us. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm just telling you what the scientists are putting out. Again, prima materia, the primordial material, the Higgs boson, well, predating the formation of the Higgs field, giving rise to the Higgs boson, and therefore all other matter, predating that are strangelets. And again, my audience, my longtime listening audience, has heard me talk about strangelets for several years now. Strangelets, more specifically, are a condensate. They are quarks that are bound together by a force known as the binding force of gluons. Gluons are both a force and a particle. The gluons, hence their name, glue the quarks together. They can be in a triad or in a hexagon or in a pentagon arrangement of 3, 5, or 6 quarks, sometimes many more, that are bound together by the gluons. Now, quarks themselves are bound by the nuclear force, and this is what the comment in the chat room was referring to, was the nuclear force. You have a gravitational force, you have a nuclear binding force, you have an electromagnetic force, and these are the primary binding forces in the universe. When we talk about the mechanics of the universe, the quantum mechanics, these are the forces we're talking about. People are familiar with gravitational force, electromagnetic force, you know, the strength, the pull of magnets. The nuclear force is something that binds quantum particles together. It has a very short range, a very short distance of effect. The electromagnetic force has a much longer distance of effect than does the nuclear force. And in between those two is the gravitational force in terms of distance of effect. Now, without going off on a tangent, I adhere to the electric model of the universe. The electric model of the universe is the electromagnetic influence. The mechanism of the universe is primarily due to the charged state of particles and their magnetic attraction and repulsion. So electromagnetic energy waves and the attraction and repulsion of charged particles in the universe is really the mechanism by which the universe operates, is electromagnetism versus gravity. Gravity is 10 to the 39th power weaker than electromagnetism. Okay, so that's big picture. But let's get back on track in terms of the binding force of strangelets. The nuclear force binding the quarks together, forming a quark-gluon condensate, are known as strangelets. And I'm really glad that this was brought up in the chat room. Let me go back to, I'm not sure who MJOBIEZ is, but let's just say MJ. I want to give tip of the hat to MJ for bringing that up. No, we don't have mods in here, MJ. No mods here, don't need them. This is a safe environment. This is a patrons only environment. So those on Blog Talk, if you're hearing this, what I'm saying is this is a safe learning environment. We, for the most part, don't have trolls. We don't have disruptors in our chat room. The chat room is comprised of people who have paid to be here. So it's really a nice environment for people to talk in the chat room with each other. And I really encourage people that are not patrons, you know, if you're tired of the chat room stuff on YouTube, on the YouTube channels, this is a great place for people to share links to other scientific information that is pertinent to the discussion. And people in the chat room have been very polite, staying on track, focusing on whatever it is that I'm blabbing about for the particular day in this live stream. So we don't need mods in here because everybody is, they're polite to one another. Again, it's a safe learning environment that we've created here. But strangelets, okay, so we're looking, and the question is strangelets not a plasma? It is a quark-gluon condensate, and the condensate itself is a fourth state of matter. By definition, Shoshana was asking the question, is the strangelet quark-gluon condensate, is the condensate the same as a plasma? Yes, this is a fourth state of matter, and this is what in the electric universe model that I just mentioned, what really makes up what science wants to call the vacuum of space is not in fact a vacuum. Space is made up of plasma. It is a conductive medium. Now, plasma by nature changes. It is not stable. Plasma will convert back to energy, or it will convert to a different form of particle. Therefore, being a fourth state of matter, it is not a gas, it is not a liquid, it is not a solid. If you will, it's an amorphous, I like to call it jello. We talked about jello on Thursday, talking about how particles are always moving. We talked about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and I was using the example of iron filings, ferrous material, magnetic material, iron filings suspended in jello to try to sort of show how those iron filings are always kind of moving because jello is always kind of moving. Well, you can think of plasma kind of like jello. It's not really solid, it's not really liquid, and it's not a gas. So Tesla described plasma in the universe, that which fills the vacuum of space, so to speak, as the ether. He described it as ether. And I think a better way of describing it is as plasma. Now, what's the big deal about strangelets? For those that are new to the Patreon community, that are new to these live streams, I'll just say this very quickly because most people have heard about the strangelets in my discussions. They predate, as I said, the formation of the Higgs field. They predate the formation of Higgs particles. In the timeline of the Big Bang. Now, I have a problem with the Big Bang, but we're using that as an illustration, an analogy of what the scientific community is putting out. In the timeline of the Big Bang, we have the moment of the Big Bang. They want to say that the Higgs boson was the first particle produced just after the moment of the Big Bang. And yet, in their own literature, they will say that what predates the Higgs boson are strangelets. That in fact, strangelets, the quarks, bound by gluons, bound by the nuclear binding force, that quarks gave rise to the Higgs boson. So let's pull back to 30,000 feet. We're talking public relations again. We're talking about what are they putting out to the public? Not to the scientific community, but what are they telling the mainstream media? Well, they will talk about the Higgs boson all the time. They will not talk about, in the public arena, they will not talk about strangelets. When you read scientific magazines, like Nature magazine and Scientific American and things like that, they do talk quite a bit about strangelets. But they don't really, even in those publications, tell you what I have told you for several years about strangelets. And that is that they are a weapons system. You guys that have listened to me for a long time, you already know where I'm going with this. What they are moving towards is the development of a weapons system utilizing strangelets. Because if you read the scientific literature, if you read the peer-reviewed papers, they acknowledge that strangelets not only predate the formation of the Higgs boson in the timeline of the universe, but they are strangelets, the most explosive substance in the known universe. Explosive because they gave rise to the Higgs boson in that explosion of the quark-gluon condensate. Now, strangelets, for many years, CERN has tried to deny that they've been producing this quark-gluon condensate. I broke the story in August of 2016. In 2016, in August, I produced a paper, went on many interviews on radio, announcing the announcement that came out of Brookhaven, not out of CERN, but came out of Brookhaven, utilizing the relativistic heavy ion collider, that at Brookhaven, they acknowledged that they had achieved a collision energy yield, a luminosity of 10 tera electron volts, 10 TeV. Now, to put that in perspective, CERN has been operating at 13.5 TeV. So focus on 10 TeV, which is lower, as a threshold that Brookhaven said when you achieve a collision energy, a luminosity of 10 TeV, you produce the quark-gluon condensate known as strangelets. In their peer-reviewed paper, published in August of 2016, Brookhaven announced that in March of 2016, they had consistently proven that they were producing strangelets, the most explosive material in the known universe. That is prima materia. That is primordial material. That is a weapon. Now, CERN, up until the time that they shut down the collider on the 3rd of December, all through last year and all through the previous year, so almost for 2 years, CERN in the peer-reviewed papers was acknowledging that they were producing the quark-gluon condensates consistently. And they were doing that in the ALICE detector, one of the 4 main detectors. So CERN has been more open in the scientific community about producing quarks, the quark-gluon condensate, the strangelets, producing this explosive material. So it begs the question, why are they producing it? Well, it's a weapon system. Just as I led off in this presentation, all of this is driven by the military funding sources. So I'm glad, MJ, that you brought this up. Again, refer to the December issue of Entangled magazine. I have gone through this extensively, this discussion of strangelets. But that is what is behind these energy development programs, these collider programs, are the strangelets. Let me put up another graphic here. Try to change this up a little bit. I saw the mention of axions in there. Yes, they are definitely looking at the characteristics of axions, but we're just going to focus on this real quick. Alrighty. Now, MJ, you know your science. You must be a scientist. I was reading your chat room comment there. Let's see what we have here. 14 is that. Let's move on with what we're discussing on terms of the colliders. But MJ in the chat room says, in particle physics, supersymmetry is a hypothetical symmetry that relates to bosons and fermions. In supersymmetric theories, every fundamental fermion is a superpartner, which is a boson, and vice versa. Yes, that's Susie. There you go. Yes, S-U-S-Y, Susie. Supersymmetry. Now, it's interesting. Supersymmetry's been, as a theory, has come under an awful lot of scrutiny and I want to say almost debunking in the scientific community. Supersymmetry has not been proven. That's part of this whole agenda to increasing the power of these colliders by increasing the diameter of the ring and being able to maintain that coefficient of energy. So the hunt for the definitive proof in the collisions of supersymmetric particles, pairs of particles, mirrors of particles, they haven't realized the supersymmetry that they were expecting, even at the 13.5 tera-electron volt energy yield, mass energy equivalency of the LHC in its present configuration. So supersymmetry is kind of going out the window in the discussions, but I do agree. I do think that there are pairs, there are mirrors, much like the matter-antimatter discussion. I do think that there are supersymmetric particles out there because it's a balance. It's a balance of energy and particles. Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. I appreciate you bringing it up, however. You're showing that you have a scientific background, and I think that's fantastic. Alrighty, let's see what else is going on here. Just so you know, in the Blog Talk audience, I try to pay attention to the chat room. It's only me. I don't have a mod in there, and I don't have someone to feed me the comments directly. All right, so breaking down again what it looks like inside of a collider. What we have here is a representation of the ring. Now you see that it's not a perfect circle, and that's on purpose. The bending only occurs at the corners of the square, if you will. So those of you that are not here on the live stream, picture a square and then you round off the corners. Those rounding off of the corners are where the bending magnets are located. Those are the dipole magnets that I mentioned before. And those magnets, they simply take the particles that want to naturally move in a straight line and bend them into a curved trajectory. Again, when you bend them into a curved trajectory, what is produced in the form of energy just by the bending, not the colliding, but just in the bending, are gamma rays and X-rays, hard X-rays, high luminosity X-rays. Keep in mind the high energy of gamma rays and X-rays as weapons. When I talk about directed energy weapons, we're talking about X-rays. When we're talking about directed particle accelerator weapon systems, we're really talking more about gamma rays and also protons, okay? So in this illustration, we're showing a storage ring, and coming off of that storage ring are what are known as beam lines. Beam lines I'm going to illustrate further as we get into the discussion. But beams are steered out of the storage ring, so they're circulating at high speed in the storage ring. They're being kept in that curved pathway by the magnets. But they also use a magnet as a doorway to allow the escape of those accelerated particles from the ring to then travel down what they call a beam line, down a straighter pathway. That beam line terminates at a fixed endpoint, and these are where they run different types of experiments. Typically, this is where you get into things like looking at superconducting materials, the ability to look at DNA, and this is directly relates to my discussions that we're going to about Berkeley, but beam lines were used for the discovery of the folding of proteins within DNA. Specifically, they're using hard X-rays to determine the structure, the folding of the proteins. And there are over 1,000 proteins in our DNA, but it's what I've described as that pasta, sort of that curly-Q pasta, those coils of pasta. That's what our proteins look like. And they use the hard X-rays, which are synchrotron energies, which are derived from this curved pathway of accelerated particles. They use those energies that come from the synchrotron to examine the folding of proteins. So those are examples. So there are direct applications for those synchrotron energies that result from the curved pathways of particles, not just the collision of particles. So you have two dynamics going on here. Without collisions, you have energies that are produced. When you do have collisions, you then have other energies that are produced, again called high luminosity energy pathways, that then they are able to take this energy signatures and the trajectories, the pathway of those particles, and determine what particles they are, what quantum particles that have been produced because of the collisions. Now, most of those particles, they wink out of existence almost instantaneously. And with those particles winking out of existence, their energy dissipates very quickly. Now, many people have heard in the popular media that CERN is creating black holes. Well, they're not. And people have said they're creating nuclear explosions. Well, they're not. This is not the splitting of the atom. A fissile chain reaction is what happens in a fissile nuclear bomb explosion. You also have fusion that occurs when you use plutonium and you use a fissile explosion to impact and implode hydrogen and cause an explosion of hydrogen from a fusion reaction. That's a whole different, that's an implosion with an explosion. That is not a chain reaction. What you're looking at with fissile material like uranium is a splitting of the nucleus and then a chain reaction of continuous splitting of further nucleus with their attendant energy yields. That's not what's happening with these collisions. You're not splitting the nucleus. You're not creating an implosion and then explosion. Neither of those fissile or fusion reactions are happening in a particle collider. You're down below the atomic level. You're now looking at the colliding of primordial particles, primary, what they call fundamental particles. This is below the level of an atom. We're going below the level of the nucleus. We're going to the components of the nucleus. In fact, let me bring up a graphic from last week. Here's the typical representation of an atom. And then we are looking at, let me see if I have that graphic. Yeah. We used this last week in the Thursday class. We have the protons, the nucleus, and the neutrons. We're actually going down below that level of the nucleus down to the quarks and leptons and muons and axions and many other. There are over 1,000 fundamental particles that have been identified by the result of these collisions within particle accelerators. Okay? So we're way down below splitting atoms, is what I'm saying. But again, all of this relates to the development of nuclear warheads. But beyond nuclear warheads, we're now getting into gamma rays, X-rays, and accelerated particles themselves, such as protons, that can be used, and heavy ions of lead that can be used as accelerated particle weapons. Okay? So I hope that clarifies that. All right, so MJ, I appreciate your comments today. This is great. Not many have the desire or are led by the Lord to be here, so I'm glad I became a Patreon just last week. Well, welcome, MJ. I'm shortening down your name, but thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you're bringing in your scientific background as well, your understanding. So with that in mind, let me just, speak on the public relations side of this a little bit as to what I'm doing. I'm reaching out to the scientific community, and many of you know, even those that are not in the scientific community, you know that we have a lot of doctors, we have a lot of physicists, we have a lot of scientific background individuals in the Patreon community, and it's growing. And I'm reaching out to the scientific community because what I'm trying to do is to illustrate, by way of the origins of quantum mechanics, the origins of particle physics, the thereby origins of quantum computing. And again, I'm being very brief here, but I go to the origins back into the discussions of alchemy, but even further back into the discussions of the divination process. Now, I'm not going to go off on the tangent too far here, but you guys have all heard me talk about the fact that in science and in quantum mechanics, in particle physics, in quantum computing, we're dealing with probabilities. This is why on Thursday in the classroom, we were talking about probabilities in trying to define the location and momentum of particles. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle was one of the principal things that we talked about on Thursday. Again, the very elementary level, foundational level discussion of quantum mechanics took place on Thursday, and even the previous Thursday we started on that. But what I'm focusing here is probabilities. And because probabilities is so preeminent in the discussion of science today, I wanted to show the origins of probabilities, what you would in the scientific community and mathematicians talking about stochastic random number generation. Stochastic is prevalent in all discussions, in all scientific disciplines today. Therefore, it's important to know where stochastic random number generation came from. It came from the practices of divination. Random number generation for the purpose of divination. Now, you guys have all heard me talk about this. For those that are new to the discussion, this is all explained in previous live streams, previous radio shows, certainly in the Entangled magazine. I talk about divination, random number generation, specifically about geomancy, because this is interdimensional communication. The origin is interdimensional communication. This is where the spiritual side of this comes in. This is why I say you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical. There is a spiritual process, and specifically what I mean by that is a sharing of, a communicating of information from fallen angels. This is information coming from a demonic source. Plain and simple, unequivocally, there's no denying that the information that we're seeing in this explosion of information, in the rapid parabolic increase in our technologies of today, understanding, putting the technologies we have today in the perspective, in the context that they've only been in their origins about 150 years back. When we talk about quantum mechanics, particle physics, when we talk about moving from Newtonian classical physics into the world of the quantum, we're only about 150 years in that timeline. Within that 150-year timeline, we have this explosion of knowledge in quantum mechanics that has rippled out into all of the scientific disciplines. And therefore, it is absolutely imperative that we realize that this explosion in information is a direct result of obtaining information through a spiritual mechanism known as divination. So, to wrap our head around this, to understand Why is it? And when you ask the question, why is it in the last 150 years, we've had World War I, World War II, we've had all these other wars that are continuing today, and this explosion in technology, driven by the military, driven by the industrial, and driven by the intelligence communities. Why has there been this explosion, this rapid advancement, this sudden, in the first time in human history, why are we seeing this explosion in this highly advanced technology that I like to focus in on in terms of quantum computing? As but one example, last week we talked about, and we will continue to talk about, the changes in DNA that's exploding. But why is all this happening? How is it that it's happening? It is happening, and I'm not trying to be hysterical here. I'm not trying to speak in terms of hyperbole, or certainly not being a conspiracy theorist. What I have done is to look at the scientific peer-reviewed papers and retrace the lineage of those scientific advancements. Because as you know, as a scientist, science is built upon the shoulders of scientific research that has come before. So you reverse that process. You look at today's discoveries and you retrace through those building blocks, you retrace the shoulders of the research that has gone on before. When you do that retracement, it takes you all the way back to the origins of these scientific discoveries. The origins of the scientific discoveries come right out of the divination practices. When you look at Ramon Lull in the 12th century with combinatorial optimization, that has a direct impact on combinatorial optimization that is used in quantum computing today. Where did Ramon Lull in the 12th century, who came up with combinatorial optimization, where did he get his information from? From previous researchers, all the way back into Africa, the source of our binary computing system, the source of geomancy. Geomancy is the binary system we use today. Now, tomorrow and Thursday, we are going to go to class on Thursday and talk about binary, ternary, and quaternary numbering systems. So if you're in the scientific community, you already know where I'm going tomorrow. But that's another building block that we're adding to in the classroom discussion. The mathematical origins is what I'm talking about. Your stochastic random number generation of probabilities. When I say probabilities, those of you in the scientific community know exactly what I'm talking about, because it directly relates to particle physics, quantum mechanics, and quantum computing, and now into artificial intelligence. So for the non-scientific members of the audience, what does this have to do with you? AI and genetic modification. Those two topics, artificial intelligence and genetic modification, they are not separate. They are not separate. So when we get to February 1st and the publication of Entangled magazine, devoted entirely to the image of the beast, folding in our previous discussion about the mark of the beast, which was the January issue of Entangled. We talked about how the mark of the beast is produced by way of a third strand of DNA. We are now going to the image of the beast and artificial intelligence folding in the discussion of DNA to produce the image of the beast. That is the February 1st issue of Entangled magazine. So, random number generation probabilities results in artificial intelligence, results in the modification of the human genome, results in quantum computing, results in all of this explosion. Probabilities has caused this explosion in technology. Where does that probability information get generated? Through divination. What is divination? It is interdimensional communication with spirits. It is spirits conveying advanced knowledge, what is described in the book of Genesis as forbidden knowledge. This is knowledge that we are not supposed to have access to, but it has been accessed through the dark arts of divination. And through the dark arts in communication with the spiritual, that forbidden information has unequivocally, definitively, I've proven in Entangled Magazine and in all of these broadcasts, I have shown that the technologies of today are forbidden knowledge that we are seeing manifesting as what I call the evidence of evil. So I'm sorry if you are a scientist that is involved in this research and development. What I reach out to you is the salvation of your soul. Now, all of us are utilizing this technology. I'm using it today. That's derived from the dark arts. Does that make me and you that are involved in using the computing systems of today, does that make us somehow sinners? No. But what I'm sharing with you is that we are involved in a system that has its origins in the dark arts, is continuing the dark arts, the practices of the dark arts today, and therefore this is jeopardizing humanity, and it is jeopardizing the souls of humanity. So, let me just go through a few more of these examples. Okay, here we go. Let's get back to our colliders. Okay, we're going to Berkeley. This is a schematic of UC Berkeley's synchrotron particle accelerator. They are not colliding particles here, they are accelerating particles. The only collisions, if you will, take place at the end of the beam lines. I mentioned the beam lines a moment ago. So in the picture here that I'm sharing, I'll address the Blog Talk radio audience here. We have a ring-based synchrotron accelerator where particles are moving in one direction. They are held to a curved pathway by bending magnets, and they are using radio frequency, what they often describe as paddles, radio frequency accelerators. They send a radio frequency pulse that is synchronized to the movement of the particles. And every time the particle comes around, it's moving faster and faster. So those radio frequency pulses have to be synchronized with the ever-increasing speed of these accelerated particles, hence the synchrotron name. Now, coming off these rings are straight lines that are called beam lines. Those terminate at a fixed point. You might consider that to be a collision, but it really isn't. It's an impact. There are no particles versus particles being collided within each other at Berkeley. Now, this is an example of a synchrotron that is used for typically medical research. A lot of the history at Berkeley has to do with particle accelerators having direct application in the world of the advancement of medical procedures, diagnostic procedures. One of the most early applications of accelerated particles were protons accelerated for the treatment of thyroid cancers. And I've given the audience this background in the past, but my father, my adopted father, my biological father, was a general practitioner at Berkeley. Many of his patients were physicists and mathematicians and engineers that worked at the Berkeley Radiation Laboratory. They called it the Rad Lab up on the hill at Berkeley. I attended UC Berkeley. These scientists were involved in oncology, the treatment of cancers. And I was able to visit the cyclotron when I was about 10 years old with my father. I actually walked across the storage ring, the top of the magnets and the storage ring of the cyclotron that they had at that time. That predates the synchrotron that they have now. So even as a kid, I had a connection with these particle accelerators. I was able to observe with my father the treatment of a patient for thyroid cancer using the bombardment of accelerated protons targeting the thyroid to kill those cancer cells. So there's a lot of benevolent work that is done with synchrotrons, and I wanted to just kind of bring that into the discussion. But in the describing of the layout of the machine, what I'm showing to you here at Berkeley are these beam lines. Now, at CERN, they have a couple of beam lines. The most predominant one is the one that targets the center point of the main ring, and that is called the North Area Impact Point. That is a beam line, just like I'm illustrating here at Berkeley. Berkeley, they call this the Advanced Light Source Building, the ALS. The advanced light source are the hard X-rays that I mentioned earlier. Hard X-rays that are produced by bending these accelerated particles into a curved pathway, a curved trajectory, and then orthogonally, which means at right angles to this main ring, you will have X-rays and gamma rays that radiate out at a 90-degree angle, orthogonally to the ring. And they take those energies, primarily those X-rays, those hard X-rays, and they use them in the beam lines, as you'll see in this here. It says X-ray lithography. Okay, this is where they're inferring the structure of subatomic particles and atomic and molecular particles. I mentioned the folding of the DNA, the folding of the proteins contained within the DNA. These were imaged using high luminosity X-rays at Berkeley. This led to the development of further research into the structure of DNA. The mapping of the human genome was a direct result of using hard X-rays from the synchrotron particle accelerator at Berkeley. So again, when I say that particle colliders have a direct correlation to DNA, they absolutely do. The connection is the production of the hard X-rays themselves. Okay, there's more to it than that, but I'm trying to be very succinct here today. Here's another illustration of that same arrangement of the beam lines that radiate out from the storage ring. Again, not a collider, just simply accelerating particles in one direction. Typically they're protons, and they are stored in this ring. They continue to circulate those accelerated particles. The storage ring, the main ring here with the beam lines, has an inner ring, and you'll see a straight line. This is a linear accelerator. The protons are initially accelerated in a straight line, then they're injected into this ring where the straight line pathway is then bent into a curved pathway, and the acceleration continues in this smaller ring. Then they're injected into this main ring, and the main ring is the storage area where the particles continue to accelerate. And then using a magnetic gate, they allow particles to escape that storage ring down a straight beam line terminating at an impact point. And during the path, during the straight pathway, the movement of those particles, they move through different types of experimental setups, different apparatus. Okay, going on to another layout of the synchrotron at Berkeley, because I'm most familiar with Berkeley, and so I tend to use this. This is the same layout here that I'm illustrating of the beam lines with the storage ring is reproduced at laboratories all over the world. It's not just at Berkeley. There are many, many labs around the world that have this exact same layout. I'll read a couple of these just for the sake of helping out the Blog Talk audience who can't see this illustration. Magnetic microscopy, diagnostic beamline, surface materials science, calibration, optics, testing, and I'm losing my voice. Spectroscopy, X-ray microscopy, femtosecond and picosecond phenomenon. Those are very short periods of time, measurements of time. Femtosecond is the smallest. Picosecond is a little bit longer time frame. but just looking at phenomenon in that. Macromolecular crystallography. Now, hard X-rays are used in crystallography quite a bit, and most of the labs around the world that have synchrotrons are focusing in on crystallography because that goes into electronics, it goes into data storage within the lattice work of crystals. This is why I talk about nanodiamonds so much in my books. In Covert Catastrophe, I talk an awful lot about the synchrotron at Berkeley and nanodiamonds, and certainly in 2048, Diamonds in the Rough, the follow-up novel, is all about nanoparticles. So crystallography, hard X-rays, and synchrotron particle accelerators as it applies to quantum computing. Okay, that's another tangent, but quantum computing is directly related to crystallography, data storage and data processing using diamonds, nanodiamonds, and other crystals. Okay, so let's move along just for the sake of brevity here today. Here's a photograph of Berkeley's Advanced Light Source Building, the dome, overlooking the Bay Area, looking out towards San Francisco, and you notice that that is what I used for my cover on my novel, my first novel, Covert Catastrophe. That's where I went to school, that's where I was born and raised, and so, you know, it's my hometown. All right, I'm putting up another graphic here, and this has to do with the Earth. I'm going to talk about pole shift here for a moment, because we're coming up on 2 hours. I just want to kind of pull together what we've talked about. China wants to build, and it's going to take them 30 years, a 100-kilometer synchrotron particle accelerator and collider. CERN does as well. Why are they doing this? Why duplicate the efforts? Well, think about the Cold War. Think about mutually assured destruction. MAD. The arms race was building bigger and bigger nuclear warheads. CERN was built to model the yield of nuclear warheads in a computer, in silico. Okay? These are weapons development programs. Now, MJ, you brought up, and I'm glad you did, you brought up strangelets. CERN is now talking more openly about developing, having been and having produced large quantities of strangelets. I said that strangelets are a weapon. They are the most explosive material in the known universe, the most powerful explosive material. That's one of the characteristics. And this is my segue into talking about the pole shift. But I'm just finishing up the discussion of the colliders. The reason for building bigger colliders is so that you have a higher energy yield at the point of collision, at the time of collision. The more gentle the curved pathway, the more conservation of energy that results. The adding of stronger and stronger 8 Tesla, 11 Tesla, 20 Tesla, 30 Tesla, and 50 Tesla superconducting bending magnets means that you can confine the magnets to a curved pathway more efficiently with less energy loss. You can use quadrupole magnets to confine particles into denser and denser bunches, and you can bring the bunches closer together, my analogy of the string of hot dogs. You can bring the bunches closer together so that you have more particles colliding and more particles thereby producing higher energy yields. Understand, this is not about prima materia. This is not about discovering the origins of the universe. This is a weapons development program focused on strangelets, the quark gluon condensate. This is about producing more. This is an arms race. Mutually assured destruction by way of strangelets, just like they did with nuclear warheads. Strangelets make nuclear explosions, be they fissile or fusion explosions, neutron bombs, hydrogen bombs, those are firecrackers in comparison to the yield, the energy yield known as an explosion. The energy yield from strangelets outstrips any weapon system that has ever been developed. Tesla, interestingly, said that if you can increase the magnetic yield, you can split the planet in two. Now, what do I mean by magnetic yield? I'm not talking about explosion. I'm talking about magnetic lines of force. This is similar to the nuclear binding that MJ brought up earlier in the chat room, the binding force of quarks. Magnetic lines of force. Electromagnetism, which is the real mechanism of the universe. Not gravity, it's the electric model. It's the electromagnetism that controls the movement of the planets, the formation of stars, the explosions of stars, and possibly black holes. Understand, black holes have never been proven. They've never been detected. They've never been reproduced. They've never been empirically proven in the laboratory to exist. Black holes still remain on the chalkboard as theory only. But you can explain the theoretical mechanism not in terms of gravity drawing in all matter. You can explain the mechanism of a black hole, the theoretical mechanism, as electromagnetic attraction. Okay? So that's just an aside. That's a whole another discussion that maybe we'll do in one of the classroom sessions. So, where's my segue here? Strangelets. Strangelets is the segue to pole shift. That's where we're going here. Those of you that read the December issue of Entangled magazine, you already know where I'm going with this. But one of the characteristics of strangelets is, as I said, it is the most explosive material in the known universe. Now, here's the second characteristic. The second characteristic is that you cannot confine strangelets. The third characteristic is that strangelets attract, because they're stable, strangelets are stable, they attract all other matter to themselves. Other matter, which is the matter that you and I interact with every day, this is why it's relevant to us. The normal matter that we interact with every day is considered unstable matter. Unstable meaning that the electrons can freely be removed. Maybe we'll cover that in detail tomorrow. But it is unstable. What it means is that strangelets attract all other matter to themselves. Bear that in mind. It's attractive force. That is a nuclear magnetic attractive force. Tesla said that if you can increase the magnetic lines of force sufficiently on the planet, you can split it in two. That's where we're going with this discussion. So give me about another 15 or 20 minutes here. This is where we're going. Not only do strangelets explode, not only do strangelets attract all other matter to themselves because they're stable, but that other one, number two characteristic I mentioned, is you cannot contain them. When strangelets are produced, when there is an energy yield from a collision of particles, such that you have an energy yield threshold that is crossed, that threshold being 10 tera electron volts, as I announced in August of 2016, that Brookhaven openly admitted to in their peer-reviewed papers. They produce strangelets at 10 TeV. CERN has been at 13.5 TeV, way beyond the threshold, and is now openly in the public arena talking about the fact that they are producing quark-gluon condensates, otherwise known as strangelets. The CERN will never use the word strangelets in public. They do in their papers, but in the public arena, they don't use the label strangelets. They talk about quarks and quark-gluon condensate. The point is, characteristic number 2, that you cannot contain quarks, comes into this discussion. Within the ALICE detector, when strangelets are produced, they plummet out of, they pass through the floor, the concrete floor of the detector chamber. Realize this is a chamber that is 3 stories tall. The detector is multiple tons in weight, comprised of collimator magnets and detector cameras. These strangelets, once they're produced in the collision inside the ALICE detector, they immediately plummet through the floor of the detector. They pass through, in this illustration I'm showing you, of the Earth and the Earth's mantle and its core. Those strangelets move directly to the core of the planet. They cannot be confined. The core of the planet is magnetically balanced, positive and negative. Call it a magnetic inert environment, if you will. It's inert. Therefore, they come to rest in the core of the planet. Magnetically, they come to rest at the core of the planet. So when they reach the core of the planet, what do they start doing? Well, this is where characteristic number 3 comes in. They begin to draw all ordinary matter, which is classified as unstable, all ordinary matter, which is the core itself, and moving out from the core to the magma, the layers of magma, and to the crust of the planet itself. This is what's known as the neutron star scenario. This is the collapsing of a star in on itself, not gravitational collapse. Remember what I said about black holes. This is magnetic attraction. This is electromagnetic lines of force. These are magnetic forces drawing a star into its core. And once it becomes dense enough, that compaction action becomes dense enough, there's a spontaneous explosion that takes place. This is why we see the explosions of stars in the cosmos. From that explosion are hard X-rays and gamma rays, accelerated particles. Those X-rays and those gamma rays from exploding neutron stars stream straight towards the planet. Okay? We'll put a graphic up to show you that. This is picturing Earth and the magnetic lines of force known as the magnetosphere, the magnetic sheath, the magnetosphere, and the magnetopause. These are the shields around the Earth. These are magnetic lines of force. These magnetic field lines provide a shield to the Earth from the incoming solar wind that's depicted in this graphic. The solar wind is composed of accelerated particles, protons and electrons, but primarily protons, are accelerated from the sun and from other exploding stars in the cosmos towards the Earth. Now they strike the magnetosphere and they are somewhat deflected, electromagnetically deflected, but many of them penetrate through the shield. So we have one layer of defense, if you will. The magnetic lines of force, the magnetosphere, provides a certain level of protection from cosmic energies, cosmic rays. Then the atmosphere itself surrounding the planet is a further layer of defense. But these X-rays and gamma rays are not entirely blocked, and they do interact with our atmosphere. In the atmosphere, we have hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and other trace elements. Those are particles. Those are elementary particles. Those particles are struck by gamma rays, and they are struck by X-rays. Naturally, in the cosmos, we have a same process of accelerating particles that is taking place artificially at CERN and other laboratories like that. Picture in the cosmos synchrotron particle accelerators and colliders producing synchrotron energies. This is naturally what is occurring in the electric model of the universe. You have particles that are colliding that then produce gamma rays and X-rays, known as cosmic rays, that stream towards the planet. When they strike the particles in our atmosphere, they collide. So naturally, we have particle collisions taking place all around the Earth. Those particle collisions also produce gamma rays and X-rays at low levels, and they produce magnetic lines of force. Again, those are the shields. Okay. I'm just acknowledging a text message I got, and I just want to say I got the text message. Okay, so we are artificially, with our particle accelerators and colliders, we are artificially producing the same electromagnetic systems, if you will, that are happening naturally in the cosmos. Let's get more specific. As you know, on the Earth, and I'm putting up a graphic here of the Earth with a bar magnet superimposed over it. The northern pole, we have the positive end of the bar magnet, and the southern pole, we have the negative. And what we have are magnetic field lines, North Pole and South Pole, that are naturally produced. This is the magnetosphere and the magnetopause. These are the shields from those incoming cosmic energies. Another illustration I'm putting up of the same thing, just to be a little clearer. Again, talking to the Blog Talk audience, magnetic lines of force are magnetic shields. Again, another artist representation. So we have layers of these shields all around the planet. Now, this is leading us to the discussion of the pole shift. So we have the north magnetic pole and the south magnetic pole. We know that the magnetic pole is shifting. Many articles have said that the northern pole is moving towards Siberia. Well, that is true. Since about 1850, scientists have been able to record the movement, the magnetic pole, not the geographic, okay, not what is on the map, but the magnetic pole at the North Pole and the South Pole, both have been migrating. A lot of attention has been given to the North Pole. Understand that both poles are migrating simultaneously. The rate of movement has been accelerating in the last 20 years. It's somewhat peaking now, and it's going to taper off a little bit. A lot of hype out in YouTube land right now is that the pole shift is accelerating. Well, scientifically, it is not accelerating. It is actually slowing in its migration. It's still moving, however. But the rapid acceleration in the rate of movement of the poles has gone up the graph, if you will, in the last 20 years. It's beginning to slow, but it is still moving. Eventually, and this is interesting, eventually the North Pole and South Pole will come together. They're migrating towards each other. Now, long before the two poles meet, there will be a magnetic flip. Is this going to happen in our lifetime? No. So is this even relevant to talk about? Yes. Excuse me, I was just drinking some water so that I can continue talking. This magnetic pole shift leading to a flip of the poles, a reversal. People want to say it's a flip. It makes it sound like it's going to happen overnight. It is not a flip. It's a pole shift. It's a pole migration. This is natural, but it is being accelerated, and this takes us back to strangelets. Okay? The production of strangelets plummeting through the floor of the Alice detector at CERN. The production of strangelets as a weapon system. And the fact that this draws natural, normal, unstable material to itself once the strangelets come to rest in the core. Now this is where it gets really very weird, if that wasn't weird enough. The movement of the poles is a natural occurrence, but it can be accelerated. And it can be steered. Now the scientific papers will tell you, as I just said, that the migration of the poles is slowing. I don't believe what they're telling us. Now how can I say that without sounding like I'm a conspiracy theorist? If you look at the changes in weather, yes, we can talk about HAARP, we can talk about spraying, we can talk about geoengineering in general. Yes, that is definitely modifying the weather. Definitely weather is being used as a weapon. Okay? That is going on. But that's not what is causing the pole shift. The weather modification is not causing. The weather changing is an outgrowth of the natural progression of the poles to change position. What is happening here is they're exacerbating. They're exacerbating the change in the pole shift. They're accelerating the pole shift. We are seeing changes in weather as a result of the pole migration. In addition to, let me underscore that, we have two things going on at the same time. We have an unnatural acceleration in the pole shift because of strangelets, and we are seeing the effects of that change in the pole location in our weather on top of the weather modification that is going on through HAARP and the spraying of the atmosphere. We also have NEXRAD radars. We have a number of systems that are modifying the weather. But the evidence that the poles are migrating faster than normal is evidenced in the weather, the patterns of our weather. So you have two things affecting our weather: the pole shift and the man-made systems of HAARP, NEXRAD, and spraying and other systems. Okay? This is full spectrum dominance of the weather, and it is full spectrum dominance of the magnetosphere. Now, why would any human do this? Well, it's not a human that's doing it. This is not conspiracy theory. This is spiritual. This is scriptural. You know from my previous discussions, and I'm kind of wrapping this up now, you know from my previous discussions about the spiritual influence upon the physical. You know that Satan hates all of God's creation. He hates humanity and he wants to kill off humanity. One of God's creations certainly is the earth, amongst many. Satan, as I've said for years, is terraforming the planet. It is his intention to destroy planet Earth because God created it. This is the jealousy of Satan. I've said many times that he counterfeits what God has created. He's counterfeiting the human race through genetic modification. We've discussed that at length. He's counterfeiting the mechanisms of the universe that God created. One of the examples of counterfeiting God's creation of the mechanisms, quantum computing and artificial intelligence, a counterfeit. Now he wants to create his version of the New Jerusalem. He knows Scripture better than we do, and he knows that in the end, in Revelation, God is going to burn all the elements. God is going to recreate the earth. God is going to provide a new heaven on earth. Satan is jealous of that, and he wants to create his own version. He wants to burn the elements before God does. This is the hubris of Satan. All of this rapid advancement in technologies is accelerating, because Satan believes in his own mind that he can move ahead of God's timeline, that he can accelerate the timeline, that he can jump ahead of God's timeline. Now, the scientists in the audience right now are just thinking, I've lost my mind, to say that Satan is behind this, and that strangelets are behind the destruction of the planet, that strangelets are behind the weather modification, that strangelets are behind the shift in the poles. Science wants to believe that this is all natural. Science wants to believe that the actions of man is causing warming of the planet. And the actions of man, the pollution of man, is causing all of these changes in the weather. And we know that that's patently false. The evidence is well out there. Geoengineering is underway. The weather modification is well underway. The production of strangelets that are now at the core, and for 2 years CERN has been producing strangelets. The relativistic heavy ion collider at Brookhaven National Laboratories is moving into what they call phase 9 or stage 9. They're into their ninth evolution of production of strangelets. They've come right out and said it. They are producing quark gluon condensates in their run 9 at Brookhaven. They're openly talking about producing strangelets. When CERN goes to the high luminosity LHC in 2026, they will be producing even higher amounts, larger quantities of strangelets. And they have come right out and said at CERN that their goal is to produce larger quantities of quark gluon condensates in 2026. I don't think we will be here in 2026. I believe that the actions at CERN for the last 2 years in producing strangelets, in concurrence with the other geoengineering efforts with the weather modification, together are resulting in the destruction of this planet before 2026. Now, I hate to be a date setter. I hate to say that we're moving into the 7-year tribulation and be dogmatic about it. I hate to be dogmatic about 2026. I hate to be dogmatic about the destruction of the planet. So what I have to do is look at the book of Revelation and see how things are unfolding that have been prophesied in the book of Revelation. I have to use God's word as the template that shows us the timeline. I'm not date setting. I'm not saying that the world is ending in 2026. What I'm saying is the 7 years of tribulation are before us. And I think most of you would agree with that. What is going to happen over the next 7 years? Somewhere in there, God is going to burn the elements. He says so in Revelation. Now, will that be in the 7-year tribulation, or will that be at the end of the 1,000-year millennial reign? It's at the conclusion of the 1,000-year millennial reign. Therefore, 2026 is not the end of the world, as God sees it in terms of reshaping and reforming the world. That's after the 1,000-year millennial reign. So what's going to happen in 2026? Well, that's the end of the 7-year tribulation. Therefore, I don't think that we really, as we know life right now, as we know reality right now, I don't think we're going to be here. You know that I do adhere to the doctrine of the imminence of the rapture, but those that are left behind will be experiencing the 7 years of tribulation. Just checking the chat room here real quick. So let me try to wrap this up. Let me try to pull this back together here. What we are looking at during the 7-year tribulation is more of this progression, not a pole flip, but more of this progression of the poles coming together. With that, more changes in the weather because of the pole migration. I believe that the natural progression of the pole migration has been accelerated due to the influence, the electromagnetic influence of this attraction of unstable matter towards the core by way of the placement of strangelets at the core. We're already seeing the evidence of strangelets at the core because the core is heating, the magma therefore is heating, and like a balloon that is being inflated, the earth is expanding. And we see the evidence of that in the movement of the earth's crust. We see the separating of plates, tectonic plates pulling apart. That's the expansion due to heating at the core, due to the attraction of material by strangelets. As more material is pulled in at the core heats. That heating is expanding the planet and separating the tectonic plates. Concurrent to that, we have the pre-existing subduction of the plates, as you see on the west coast of the United States. There's a subduction of the plates on the west coast. But worldwide, more predominantly, we are seeing a separation of the tectonic plates. This is why we see, as in Revelation, the earthquakes in diverse places. In divers, D-I-V-E-Rs, divers, much like a scuba diver, okay? In diver places, much like you're diving down to the seabed where the tectonic plates are, where the fissures are, where the undersea volcanoes are that we're experiencing right now. That's due to the heating of the core, the expansion of the planet. That is due to the plummeting of strangelets from CERN to the core of the planet, and from Brookhaven National Laboratory, who's continuing to produce strangelets that are plummeting to the core. The evidence is here. Volcanic activity, earthquakes, tectonic activity, the change in the weather patterns that result from that, because now that we are seeing more volcanism from the seabeds heating up the oceans, we are seeing more above the surface volcanic activity, which is pumping more material into the atmosphere. All of this is exacerbating the human-induced geoengineering of spraying and HARP activities and NEXRAD activities. All of these together are evidence of terraforming of the planet. So you have a concurrence of strangelets and geoengineering that's taking place. The pole shift I attribute to the actions of the gathering of, through electromagnetism, of quark gluon condensates, the gathering of unstable matter at the core of the planet, and then the mantle of the planet, the magma chambers, and the mantle and the crust. This attraction that is going on while we have the heating and expansion of the planet is accelerating this magnetic shift. There is a change to the rotation to the core of the planet that is occurring because of the actions of strangelets. Over the course of how many years, we don't know. 10 years to 100 years depends on the amount of strangelet material in the core, but certainly over the course of the next many years, we will begin to see, not we as humans, but if we were here long enough, we would see the formation, the conversion of planet Earth into a neutron star. This is exactly the same electromagnetic action that takes place in the stars when the stars collapse into quasars and explode over a long period of time. Earth is no different. Understand that what we see as the Earth on the crust is just a thin layer over what really is a molten planet. So that's what I want to leave you with, is this image today. We are sitting on a molten globe. It is a sphere. We are sitting on a molten planet. This is a jello planet, if you want to be silly about it. We're not sitting on a planet that is solid. It is a liquid planet. And because it is liquid, it is unstable. The spiritual side of this discussion is that Satan, as I said, wants to terraform the planet into a planet of his own creation. He knows that God is going to do the same thing following the millennial reign, when God burns all the elements. Satan is trying to get ahead of that timeline. That's the nature of him. That's the nature of his hubris. So this is a spiritual war that is going on right now. And we are seeing the evidence of it physically. You cannot separate the spiritual from the physical. Plain and simple, no hyperbole. This is spiritual warfare that we see the evidence playing out in front of us. And it is all reflected in the book of Revelation. Okay. Let me check the chat room. As we like to say here, we've been flying on patch air. We have long ago landed at the airport and been doing a slow taxi up to the gate. And we are about to deplane. I just like to play with that. So I just wanted to say thank you for being here. I see that my better half, Kathleen, has joined the chat room long ago, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you for all of your comments and adding to the discussion. It's wonderful that we don't need a moderator in this chat room, that it is a safe environment for us to exchange ideas, to share and encourage one another. This is not a place where we are trying to scare anyone. There is no fear here. We know that the Lord is in control. We know that this is God's creation and his timeline. And what I'd like to do is segue into what's going to happen tomorrow. When I talk about God's timeline, I'm talking about the movement of God. Literally, the movement of God. If you're a patron, please refer to the webinar that Kathleen and I did, in which we discussed the movement of God. We talked about full spectrum dominance. I think that's the title of the webinar, is Full Spectrum Dominance. But we talked about the movements that God makes. We equated those movements to 28 steps, 28 movements of God. Satan, however, only is able to move in 3 steps. We call the 3-step, we base the 3-step of, sounds like a dance, the 3 steps of Satan as the ternary mathematical system. Okay? T-E-R, ternary, T-E-R-N-A-R-Y, if you want to look that up, ternary mathematics. Tomorrow in the live stream, the classroom live stream, we will talk about binary, ternary, and quaternary mathematics, those number systems. This relates to the movements of Satan as opposed to the movements of God. And this is why I say the timeline, Satan is trying to leap ahead. He's trying to get ahead of God's timeline. Kathleen is putting in the chat room here, balanced ternary. So balanced ternary is what we will present tomorrow. It's -1, 0, and +1, balanced ternary. The timeline, the movement of Satan versus the timeline and the movements of God, we will present in the discussion of binary balanced ternary and quaternary numbering systems tomorrow. This also relates to this action of divination and this random number generation. So please join us tomorrow for the live stream discussion on that. That backs up what I have said today about the terraforming of the planet. It backs up the movement of Satan to destroy this planet and to destroy the human race. Satan wants to counterfeit the destruction of the planet that God will do in the burning of the elements. And he wants to counterfeit our spiritual conversion when we are taken in the rapture, when we are taken as his saved children. We are converted, and Satan is trying to copy, he's trying to counterfeit that change that God will undertake with us. So, I hope that helps. I hope that takes away the fear. Don't worry about a pole flip. It's not going to happen overnight. The pole shift is underway. We see that in the changes in the weather, but don't be fearful of that because God is in control of all of this. The bottom line is, if you're not saved, if you're not found in the book of life, if you are not indwelt with the Holy Spirit, it requires your honest confession of sin, your literally, in my case, getting down on bended knee and repenting for sin. A true heart of repentance leads to salvation. And all of this evidence of evil that I'm presenting is for the purpose of the salvation of souls. So I highly recommend break out the Bible, get into the Word, get into the truth. It takes away all the fear. Seek that salvation through Jesus Christ of your soul, because it takes away all of the fear and it protects you through the full armor of God. The Holy Spirit that is provided to you is a gift. It is a gift that all can receive. All can receive the salvation. All can be saved and forgiven of sin. And therefore, it's important that you understand that even though I'm presenting all of this scientific evidence, that it is really for the purpose of turning people to Jesus Christ for the salvation of their soul. That's what this is all about. I'm just providing evidence. Okay? So, thank you. Thank you to the new patrons. Thank you also to those that have a scientific background that are joining us. And I think, if you are focused on the secular as a scientist, it is time to examine what is going on in the world around us and realize that this is a spiritual war, that we are contending with spiritual entities. We always have been. And it will continue to be a spiritual battle. And therefore, you need to have the spiritual weaponry of the Holy Spirit and the protection of the full armor of God that is provided through the Holy Spirit. I think if you search within yourself and you're honest with yourself, you will agree that this is spiritual warfare and that the time is drawing near, that the 7-year tribulation is about to start. And it is not a time that any of us want to be alive and here for. We want to avoid the tribulation. It's a time of judgment. Okay, so with that, God bless you. Thank you, everyone who's been in the chat room today and those that have just been quietly listening. And if you found that this information is of benefit, please pass it on to others. And to those of you that are in the Blog Talk Radio audience on Friday, we invite you into the Patreon community, and it is a safe place to learn and to exchange information and not have to deal with trolls. Okay? So, God bless you all. Thank you. Have a great day. And Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow at noon Eastern Time for class. Binary, ternary, and quaternary. Thank you, my friends. Bye-bye.